Welcome to the Nurses and Hypochondriacs podcast, Samuel Spitale.
Thank you for having me.
I thought it was so interesting when you sent me your bio. Do you know what I'm going to say? What I thought was so interesting that you're a
Uh,
member of Mensa.
oh no, I had no clue. But yeah, a few years. When was that? Maybe 10 years ago now, 15 years ago. Um, yeah, I mean, there's not much else to do with that title except throw it in a bio, I guess. But
Oh my gosh. So you have to you have to have like an IQ in the 98th percentile. I was reading
uh,
to join Mensa.
yes, you have to take a test, and the test for the most part is a lot of I don't know, visual, spatial kind of like challenges and I don't know, like word problems and riddles and those kind of things. It's not it's not necessarily measuring knowledge or anything. It's more of uh, I guess thinking skills and it's the best way to describe it. Thinking and puzzle skills and stuff like that.
That's interesting. I see things in puzzles and like I had dyslexia when I was little. I still have bits of it that come out um when I get very anxious or nervous or in a situation where I have to think quick. I mean, I can think quick, but so when something just throws me off, I can kind of feel it come on and I don't know right from left, but I can see patterns. It's like my brain is an AI, which is very interesting, which is why I love your book, How to Win the War on Truth. So let's talk about yourself a little bit more. Tell us who you are and why you wrote this book, which is so awesome.
Sure. So I'm based in LA too. A writer and storyteller. My degrees are in mass communication, my bachelor's and master's. I grew up in Louisiana, went to Louisiana State University for college, and then moved to the West Coast after school. I've written for Huffington Post, Geek Magazine, Star Wars Insider, Advocate.com. Um, and yeah, I wrote a book called Star Wars Collecting a Galaxy about sideshow collectibles, and How to Win the War on Truth is probably my first book that's all mine, my idea, my execution, everything. And so the book kind of came out of 2016, out of conversations with family and friends after the election or during the election. There was so much misinformation during that election cycle, to me, which was pretty obvious. But the more I talked to people back home in Louisiana, where I grew up, the more I realized just how widespread misinformation was and how many people believe stuff that simply wasn't true. So I kind of became obsessed with how to penetrate those barriers of belief and, how do we help people see the bigger picture? How far back do we have to get people to step to see that, so much of what we believe has been sold to us like any other consumer good.
And I saw your lecture at the West Hollywood Library, which is one of my favorite libraries in Los Angeles.
Oh,
That's
it's
my
great.
first
It's a great
favorite
space.
library. It's so architecturally beautiful. It's just amazing. My second favorite library is the Rancho Mirage Library. I'm in Palm Springs. So the Rancho Mirage Library, which has a planetarium.
Ooh, that's cool.
You have to come. I knew you would love it
That's
as a
super
Star
cool.
Wars, fan. And stuff. I have this obsession about libraries, which I absolutely love to check out wherever I'm at. So it was a lot of fun. I was just sitting there doing some writing, and then I heard overhead that you were going to be speaking. And I was like, I'm going to go to this, and I ended up buying your, but I mean, it was an amazing lecture because I love branding. I love marketing. I love the psychology of it because a lot of people don't know what is going on. It's like this whole mind control, and it's only getting worse. Like today, I was reading an article on how they're going to start like in dreams, like putting advertising in your dreams, which is crazy, right? It's very much like that movie, The OA, like season 2, where they have this whole dream thing where people are dreaming and they're like playing games in their dreams or whatever. But it's the same thing. They were like talking about the iWatches and just sleepwear, and how it's going to be embedding this type of marketing in your dreams. Like when you wake up, you're going to want McDonald's or whatever. So tell me how long it took you to write this book, because it's awesome. I love how it's written like a graphic novel, because the pictures are very entertaining to me, because I found myself reading it over a period of time and also stopping to enjoy the pictures because I'm such a visual person and I love imagery and stuff, but it totally brought everything together.
Good. That's good to hear. Yeah, with the images, I wanted them to be a source of levity for a lot of the otherwise dreary economic data. And, I thought
Right.
the images would add some fun to it and some humor. And it was also a great way to, illustrate a lot of the data too with charts and graphs and stuff. But anyway, yeah, I've been working on the book. I mean, yeah, it's hard to quantify exactly how long it took because I feel like so much of my reading and research and writing over the years kind of led up to it, I guess.
Yeah.
I feel like I'd been working on it in one form or another. Yeah, I moved to LA like 10 years ago to focus on story writing and screenwriting. And, around 2015 or 16, I was writing more about like inequality and socioeconomics and media and misinformation and things that were, I guess, things I was experiencing in my own life, but then also kind of a call back to my journalism days in college. And then so a lot of my writing just kind of tended to take on more serious notes and more nonfiction. And I was reading a ton of nonfiction, and then I think I had an idea for the book, but wasn't sure it was a book idea. But I thought at first, oh, maybe this could be a workshop or a class or
Right.
something where I help my friends and family basically get back in touch with reality. Um, and so I kept thinking of like them the whole time as I was doing this. Like, all right, what all do we need to do? What all do I need to teach them so that they see that they've been kind of hoodwinked here,
Yeah.
believing so much BS. And and that psychology was a part of it, and media literacy was a part of it, and the sociology lesson, and understanding just power structures and history. And so the challenge was trying to figure out the best framework to explore all of these things and what made the most sense. And that took probably a good like year of playing around with the ideas and not quite sure what the through line was. I mean, the through line now seems obvious that it's propaganda uh, and misinformation. But at first, that wasn't necessarily the framework I was playing with. I kind of had to realize that, oh yeah, that's what this is really about. And so yeah, probably a good year or so playing with the material and collecting all the information. And it finally coalesced into a manuscript. And then once the publisher came on, thankfully, I already had the manuscript or a manuscript. It got revised a bit, but not a ton. It was more about fleshing out stuff and adding more information to back up some points, and then deciding on what to trim because we only have 300 pages, and there was just so many examples. And so the development process for the book took just a little over a year and a half, something like that, which is not long at all, considering there's 300 pages of illustrations as well as
Yeah.
text.
There's a lot.
Um,
Yeah.
it was a very fast. The artist, like, man, he was just knocking stuff out. Very quick turnaround. Less than a year, probably 9 to 10 months for most of the art. And I was still reading and researching like the entire editorial process. So like every time a new edit would come in, I was adding stuff constantly, like, oh, I just learned this, or oh, let's squeeze this
Yeah.
in, or every time I'd learn a new fact or have another bit of data, it was like, oh, that's yeah. And thankfully the editor, Quirk was like great. Like, my editor would be like, oh my God, that is great. Let's put that in. Yeah, so
Yeah.
Yeah. So it was great. So yeah, probably a good, in 2 years, I guess, um, more or less. But the years of reading and research before that, uh, helped a lot because it wasn't like I was starting with a blank slate. It was all stuff I had been reading about over hundreds of books for a
Yeah.
good decade. So
Yeah, I could totally tell. So where should we start with this? I think the best way to start is with Sigmund Freud, Edward Bernays, and Netflix, because those are all kind of interconnected and people don't know this. Like, I have a new project that I'm working on, and I hired this guy, and he was, very into advertising. So I asked him, "Do you know who Edward Bernays is?" And he's like, "No." And I was like, "How could you want to, you know, do commercials and be in advertising and marketing, and you don't know who Edward Bernays is?" You know? So tell us who he is.
sure. So he was well, you start with Sigmund Freud. So Sigmund Freud was kind of like the father of psychoanalysis, and he believed that the key to understanding everybody was in their subconscious, and excuse me. And so Freud, a lot of the early psychology and psychiatry kind of came from Floyd from Freud.
Freud.
He studied human
Freudian slip.
desires and unconscious behavior. Do what would you say?
It was I go Freudian slip there, but go ahead, sorry.
Yes. Um, and then so Edward Bernays was Freud's nephew, who kind of used his uncle's insights to, basically sell them stuff. And so he became kind of the father of public relations, mostly because that's what he called himself. But he was quite a character. But yeah, Bernays kind of invented so many of the things we take for granted today, but like the
In
publicity stunt.
American like,
Yeah.
in American culture, like, he created a
Oh
lot of
yeah.
the like, what people
A
eat for
lot.
breakfast, right?
Oh yeah, introducing us to bacon and eggs, putting bookshelves in the home so people would buy more books, like healthcare workers wearing hairnets to increase hairnet sales, not for hygiene. But even he created so many of the marketing tactics we see all the time, like the idea of a publicity stunt or a celebrity endorsement, or those were all kind of things he pioneered. And so yeah, he was huge with public relations, marketing, advertising, selling us stuff, tapping into unconscious desire, which is what you need to sell to, keep the capitalist machine going. Always wanting
Exactly.
something, always needing something. Yeah,
He
whether it's, yeah,
also, he also was, I think one of the people responsible for the whole cigarette campaigns. And once, I wrote an article that was published in Working Nurse in 2017 on how nurses were promoting cigarettes. Nurses used to smoke in hospitals. Once the cigarette industry figured out that in the 1950s cigarettes caused cancer, well, then they got nurses and doctors to promote cigarettes. And they were like, "Oh, but it helps you inhale," and, they had all these slogans and
T-zone, right?
campaigns.
The T-zone,
The T-zone, right.
the ads. I've seen lots of the cigarette ads with doctors hawking cigarettes, and how some of it's great for the T-zone, which was the throat, or
Oh my
something.
gosh.
Yeah,
And
how did
females.
for well, so Bernays definitely helped women start smoking. He basically removed the stigma and made it, an equal opportunity offender. But how did they recruit doctors and nurses, the tobacco companies? Like, was it insidious? Like, did they do that because they knew their own research? It was a health
Yes.
risk, and they thought so. It was a deliberate
Yeah, it was
manipulation tactic.
deliberate. Right, for sure. Yeah. And they were
Wow.
going to doctors' conferences, giving them cigarettes, barrels of cigarettes. I used to work for a pharmaceutical company, and this is where I learned a lot about branding and marketing because majority of what they push is all in branding and marketing. I had so many classes. And one of my coworkers, a sales girl, she worked for was it Marlboro? I think one of the big cigarette companies, and she was one of the salespeople. Like she would go to um she would go to liquor stores and make, and see like how many cigarettes were being sold and stacked and all of that. So that's what she was in charge of. So from cigarettes, she went to an oral antiplatelet drug because she told me
Wow.
that someone came out, saw her doing her job and attacked her and was like, my father died smoking cigarettes, and she felt so bad, so she went into selling oral antiplatelet drugs for a pharmaceutical company. So but
Wow.
yeah, so I just sent you my article because
Oh,
I
good.
did detail it, and it is very interesting. And one of the old deans at UCLA School of Nursing, I interviewed her, and she was pivotal in getting the UCLA campus to stop smoking and no cigarettes. I believe in 2005 or 2007. So it was a smoke-free campus
Mhm.
back then, the whole campus. And then she had this whole campaign on helping nurses to stop smoking that was national, and then it went global. So she had global partners as well. So I'll send you that article, but it is one of my favorites. And Working Nurse keeps republishing it and posting it on
Yeah.
LinkedIn and stuff, which I'm
Oh,
so
good.
grateful
Yeah.
for. Yeah. So that was one of my
And
my main journalistic pieces, because I did also do other stuff with nurses in the media, which that's how, of course, living in Los Angeles, I mean, how can you not study media? It's everywhere,
it's everywhere.
basically.
Yes.
I grew up
It's everywhere.
in LA, so I grew up like at 4 years old. They were filming The Incredible Shrinking Woman with Lily Tomlin right
Lee
across from
Tomlin.
where we lived.
Yeah.
So I remember
Oh,
going on
funny.
set, because my dad took me on set. We were
Awesome.
walking around, and it was really fun. I still remember that. So very interesting. But yeah,
So
media
weird
is
you
all
mentioned
around
that.
us.
Yeah. Because
So, but
literally last night I was thinking about that movie for some reason.
stop
Something
it.
hadn't, I really was. I was on the drive home. I went to see a friend and I went to go see a podcast taping of Love It or Leave It. And I don't, something must have been said that made me, that triggered and had me thinking of that movie. And I was like, oh yeah, what year was that? But no, on the ride home, I was totally thinking of that. So really funny you mention it because
Yeah, somewhere
no
in the
one's ever
late
mentioned that movie
70s,
in my
early
life.
80s. Yeah.
Early
Wow.
80s. Yeah, I
Yeah.
think so.
Yeah,
Early
one day
80s.
I will meet Lily Tomlin. I have it on there somewhere. I mean, somehow she will come back. It'll be full circle. So, but
I
let's
saw her at the
talk about.
strike, the writer strike last year,
Oh, did
briefly.
you?
She
Oh,
and Jane Fonda both popped by one of them, one of the days. It was hard to see. There was like tons of people in
how
front of me, but
neat.
I did glimpse. I glimpsed her. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I hear she's very lovely. So, um, so Netflix and Bernays. So the CEO of Netflix, what is his name? One of the CEOs, he is the like grand nephew of Edward Bernays, which is
I
interesting.
did not know that.
You didn't know that? Yeah,
No, I did not.
that is an interesting. I have it written here somewhere. Where? Yeah. So he is
Hmm.
the great nephew. I forget what the guy's name. I had written it down. Um,
Oh, is that? I think I've got it in one of the notes. Mark Randolph.
yeah,
Is that?
I think
Right?
that's him.
Uh, no, I
So
did not realize that. Interesting.
yeah. So I find it very interesting. And so that's one of the things that they're saying. So Netflix is kind of like this marketing, media um generating machine because of all of that, which I find it all very interesting. And how Netflix started. Netflix was just like a mail order DVD thing.
Right. Yeah, they've come a
And then
long
it
way.
it kind of, yeah, pretty crazy. So getting back to your book. So, right. So Americans consume so much media, like I was saying, especially if you live in Hollywood. Media is just a way of life. And now with TikTok and I mean, there's just so much crazy stuff. Like, for example, I had a patient, a mom, and she was saying, she's like, well, there's so much pressure on me to be a perfect parent. And I was like, I was like, "Where is that coming from?" You know, it's like, "Who is making you be perfect? Who is holding you to these standards?" And she's like, "Social media." I am not kidding you. And she was very, very serious, you know? And I was just like, "Well," you know, and I was just like, "Well, those are just people." I mean, they're probably not even
Yeah.
perfect themselves. They're just creating content, you know? I mean, you
Right.
don't have to
Right.
follow them.
You don't
And
have to
sure,
be perfect in real life,
you
just
don't
on
have to.
social media,
Exactly.
right? Real
Right.
life doesn't matter anymore. It's just how you present it on social media.
Right. So let's talk about that. I mean, and in your book, it's like, is that what also inspired you to write it because of like you were saying with the elections and everything like that? Because like
Well, so
reality is being blurred.
oh God, yeah, reality is, I mean, so few people I feel like are in touch with reality these days, and social media is a large part of that. Um, I think the media literacy parts, which is why I opened the book with media literacy, because it is extremely important, especially in being able to differentiate, between all the media messages we get. And the average person does not. If I'm on Twitter, and I'm seeing feed after feed, like, I'm looking at it like, okay, that's just marketing, or that's public relations, or that's journalism. And the average person's not. They're just seeing it like, oh, look at all this information. Um, and it's not information. Most of it's BS. And
It's
so,
opinions. It's a mishmash
right, it's
of
opinion
people's opinions.
masquerading as yeah, it's a lot of it is somebody trying to sell you something. There is a lot of PR like on there, um someone trying to sell us on an idea. It doesn't even have to be a product,
Right.
but
That's
an
it.
idea.
Someone's right.
Everything, from Iraq having weapons of mass destruction to, the only thing that stops a bad guy with a gun is a good guy with a gun, or, like all of those are all sales tools. Slogans are not solutions, they're just sales tools. And so training people to, see the difference between true news and journalism and then all of the bullshit out there that's trying to obscure it, which is, you know, publicity and branding and advertising and marketing and PR and now conspiracy theories and, deliberate disinformation. So yeah, being able to distinguish between those is part of the points of the book. That, yeah, especially for older Americans, because they seem to have the toughest time.
So you think that
Uh,
older Americans are having more of a tough time than younger ones? Because I think
yes,
it's almost
they're
everybody.
it is, but the oldest ones definitely share like double the amount of false fake news than the younger ones. Uh, the younger ones are a little more media savvy. Um, but no, it is all ages, agreed. But the majority of the misinformation shares tend to come from like age 65 and older.
Like the
I was
boomers.
reading.
So
Yeah, which
why
makes
is
sense, right?
that?
Because, well, I mean, they didn't grow up with the internet or computers. They're not. I just don't think they're as well versed in, all of the digital communication platforms uh, that the other ones are. So, my parents are probably, if they see, something that looks like a news item, they're probably very likely to think it is a news item and not like, some uh, well-funded, right-wing think tank trying to, sell an economic agenda that rewards their wealthy backers. Like, so they, I think they're probably just less critical and or a little more take things at face value, and they probably shouldn't. Um, and a lot of the things that get shared on social media are the things that are emotionally engaging and emotionally arousing, whether they're true or not. And so, if you're not if you're not like emotionally aware and you're not, kind of trained or thinking, um, if you're not looking at those things, those markers of BS, then you're also probably more likely to succumb to them. And, you see something that makes you angry, you want to share it. Um, and, your emotions have kind of circumvented the critical thinking there. But, we're all, that goes for everybody, not just older folks, by all means. That's all of us.
Yeah, is so true. But it's so interesting how marketing shapes the world, and branding shapes the world. Like I went to a UCLA alumni panel, and they were talking about, oh, we're so proud to come from UCLA. It's such a great school, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, yeah, it's a brand. Like Gucci is, I mean, it will open doors for you because it's a brand. Like, I can't tell you how many jobs I got just by putting UCLA on my CV, how many doors were open for me. And it was super interesting, Of
Yeah.
course, is also based on my CV and where I've worked, but mainly I really feel that the UCLA the UCLA brand opened so many doors. And the funny thing is, when I went to like years ago, almost 20 years ago, to this information session to get into grad school, I had this Gucci purse and I was just sitting in this information session, and the woman speaking stopped speaking and she calls out my name. And I was like, wait a minute. And it was someone I had gone to elementary school with. And she said she was eyeing my Gucci purse. So then I go to talk to the director of the pediatric program that I was wanting to get into, that I got into. And again, she was like, oh, where'd you get your Gucci purse at? So nice, and here I go. It's so funny. I'm going into this branding school with a brand that opened up a door. A brand opened up a door for me to get into a brand school that opened up many other doors for other career opportunities for me, which I find super interesting. And people don't realize it. They don't see things like that, And I've had so many people tell me, how do you see things that way? And I go, well, I worked for a pharmaceutical company and they teach you to see things this way, because you have to tackle your audience with these techniques in order to persuade them to buy your product, you know. Without that, it's very, very difficult to sell them this product. So it's all very, it's a very well-oiled machine on how they teach you. And it goes into even like buying diamond rings, right? And Valentine's Day.
Right. So much of what we celebrate in this country has, been sold to us. Taking a coffee break, like, yeah, these were all things that didn't exist until very successful marketing campaigns came along and convinced us that, yeah, we have to buy a diamond ring to prove how much we love the person. And the coffee companies, when the New Deal labor relations went into effect and breaks were required in the workday, the coffee companies jumped on it and said, oh, well, let's convince people to take a coffee break instead of a soda break or a tea break or whatever else. And so, like, yeah, everything is about selling something. Like, and I feel like that's, one of the main takeaways from the book, I hope, is, that people question for every media message that we see, who's benefiting by me buying this? And
Exactly.
not buying just a Gucci purse, but buying beliefs, tough on crime or family values or whatever it is, any belief. Always think about who's really um, benefiting from me buying this idea. Um, and that usually tells you who the people are that are up to no good, like a lot of the times. Always kind of follow the money in that respect. But
Yeah, I saw this movie several years ago. It was called Desolation Center, and it was about how the punk rock movement started in LA and then moved to the desert. So the desert festivals had started, like Lollapalooza, Coachella, and many other desert festivals. So basically, there was gosh, what is his name again? I had it written down. Chief Daryl Gates. So Chief Daryl Gates in the early to mid 80s, I believe, he had this whole campaign on making punk rockers look bad. So he was calling them degenerates, and he would have these stage raids, right? All over Los Angeles, and really and scaring the public. He would get on TV, and they would, the news would be there, and he would be like, saying, "Oh, these people are degenerates, this and that." So then the punk rockers, they were forced to go underground and do underground clubs, and eventually they started moving out into the desert. And because of that whole movement, we have these desert festivals, right? Which we just finished up
Wow.
Coachella. And it's such an interesting movie. It's very, very well done. And so I
So what
started
was
to
his rationale or reason? Like, what was his reasoning? Why did he want to take them
he
down? Did
just
he
didn't
think they
like
were
them.
like
He just didn't like the punk.
satanic or evil, or was he
Yeah,
like,
he
like,
was
was
just
there a political motive? Hmm.
I think it might have been either he was trying to maintain his position in office, or he just didn't like them. They said that he was just a malevolent person, and I did some research on him, and it seems like that just was his whole modus operandi. That is just who he was. If he didn't like you, well, he just would take out this whole thing. And the interesting thing about Chief Daryl Gates is, so these were called simulations, right? And so he would, they were all very planned out whenever they were going to be done. So it's all on his Wikipedia page. It's very interesting. He also started his own private investigation company or something like that, or uh, a surveillance company. So he started his own surveillance company. And this is the most interesting. He consulted on Grand Theft Auto, the video game. Bizarre. So I'm just like, what? It's so crazy. Like, I kept going down all these crazy rabbit holes on this person, and he just, he didn't. He, there was assumptions that he might have been gay, but he was very homophobic as well, and just very bizarre. So if you read his Wikipedia page, it is quite interesting, and it all kind of comes together. But great movie, Desolation Center. I went to go see it here in Palm Springs, and the people that made the movie were here, and there was like a little concert after. It was really, really cool, and it happened a few years ago at the museum. So really interesting event. But yeah, it just goes to show you how things happen. Like, is this really true? And now we're seeing that with the protests going on, with the Palestinian protests in universities, where graduations are now being canceled, which is the saddest thing ever. It's just heartbreaking. So you're like, okay, well, are these truly people who are protesting for Palestinians, or is this just a simulation? Are these people hired? How do we know?
Yeah, I've been seeing the coverage of the protests, but haven't really dove in to see what's what yet, because I feel like it's kind of too early to like really know what's going on. There seems to be so many I guess factions at work. Like, there are people that are legitimately protesting all of the, innocent civilians dying in Palestine.
Right.
But then you also have pro-Palestinian people taking that out on Jewish people. So then that leads to people protesting anti-Semitism.
Exactly.
Like there are just so many parts. It's so not black and white. And so it's tough for me when I see the news to know, um, yeah, there's just so many different factions. Like, you can have people that are like pro-Israel, or you have people that are pro
Yes.
Palestine, but then I haven't seen any pro Hamas, but I've seen lots of politicians claim they're pro Hamas. Like, the blurring of what's what.
Right.
And then of course then, you know, you have outside agitators who God knows what their agenda is. And then you have the police, which, you know, that's always a recipe for escalating violence.
Right, for
um,
sure, for sure.
right? You know, if everything looks like if you're a hammer, everything looks like a nail. And so when you bring in armed law enforcement, what else are you going to do? Um, yeah, I just feel like it's so not clear to me. But yet I'm constantly amazed on social media. All of these, you know, political pundits are weighing in, like trying to just use whatever as rationale for calling people un-American or patriot or whatever it is. And it's
Right,
like, you don't know, like you have no clue. You can't just dismiss all of the protests across all the college campuses as being, you know, any one label, because there is clearly a lot of crap going on. And, you know, you won't know till afterwards, really, what, you know, who's been instigating, who, like, you just don't know. It's just too early. Uh, so it drives me crazy when I just see someone trying to grandstand on a blanket statement when it's just so not,
yeah,
you know,
yeah,
that clear cut. You know, like we
yeah,
just,
it's
I mean,
so
I don't, and I,
gray.
yeah, you know, and you know, you could have, you know, anytime they have like one person talking or like, oh, you know, I saw this and I saw this, and which is great, but that's like one, like that's still just one point of view from that one person's perspective, only in the part of that protest that they were involved. Like, so who knows what the hell's going on the other side of campus, or like, yeah, it's too gray right now to really like, yeah, too many moving parts to understand yeah, what's really going on or what's behind it. And yeah, I don't even really know what to think, because you know, I don't feel like a narrative is coalesced yet.
For sure, for sure. I mean the same thing. I don't know what to think either. I just think it's heartbreaking that people have to miss their graduations because that is such a huge
Yeah.
life moment and achievement with all the schooling that you went through, and you can't even have your, your stage graduation with all your family there and stuff. That just is
Yeah.
heartbreaking to me. So,
And just wait for the politicians to now use this as excuses to start defunding education even more,
exactly.
which is what I'm
Right.
already seeing, which is
Ugh,
already outrageous tuition at this point. So
for
the
sure.
negative effects on that side are probably the things that, you know, may long term have the biggest consequences.
Yeah. In your book, I love how on chapter 8, you quote President John F. Kennedy: "The great enemy of truth is very often not the lie, but the myth," and how people love to believe in myths. I mean, myths are the basis for storytelling. And I remember I met up with this criminal attorney, international criminal attorney, and we were talking about myths, and he bases a lot of what he does on myths. He went to, I forget what college he went to in London, but um he had to give a dissertation on myths, on mythology, and like Homer's The Odyssey and stuff. I mean, so what can you tell us about this and how people have these strong beliefs and myths and how it could really lead them astray sometimes?
Yeah, I mean, you know, we have myths for a variety of reasons, and a lot of them are aspirational or inspirational. Like, you know, when we watch Star Wars or those types of movies, you know, the good versus evil, and, you know, realizing your potential and trying to, you know, make a difference in the world. Like, all of those can be great, but when you have people, you know, kind of manufacturing myths that tie into like unconscious bias or racism or our worst impulses, you know, those are the myths that get so embedded that people, you know, you take them for granted. Like, you know, you just think they're real, like the welfare queen, you know, like the myth of
Right.
the
I
welfare
love
queen,
li-
or
can you talk a little bit about that myth of the welfare queen? The myth of
sure.
the welfare queen, because that was in the Reagan era, which it's a
It
documentary, right?
there was a great book called The Queen, And I mean, there've been a lot written. There were a lot of articles, maybe at Slate, that had like the story, and then that guy that wrote for that, I think, turned it into the book The Queen. But basically, yeah, you had this woman in the 70s who, um, yes, she had committed welfare fraud, but that was like the least of her offenses. She was like a thief. She had poisoned somebody.
My
She was like
God.
psychotic. She kidnapped babies and tried to sell them. There was just her criminal record is like a mile long, but to sell, to turn Americans away from the welfare and some of the public services that after the civil rights movement that were now going to Black Americans, white politicians on the right kind of played up this idea of a welfare queen, which really didn't exist. But for this lady, Linda Taylor, who did all these horrible things, they used her as a shining example of welfare fraud, even though her welfare fraud was pretty minimal compared to everything else she did. But she became, like a very workable, useful myth for them, because if they could sell white people on the idea that lazy Black people were mooching off their hard earned tax dollars, well, then you would have white people turning against a lot of these social programs that serve two purposes. One was to under to undermine all the civil rights era and the progress Black people were making, part one. And then the real motive was that if you cut all these social services, then you could give all the wealthy people that helped Reagan in office tax breaks. So, for every dollar cut in social services, that's one more dollar that the wealthiest 1% can get back and don't
Of
have to pay in
course.
taxes. So, there's always a financial motive with these things. Greed and power is always, um, always the cause of so much racism and everything and all of our problems. So yeah, the welfare queen is, I mean, I'm from the South. We clearly grew up, that's like a thing. Like everybody still thinks that. So that myth survives because it taps into racist stereotypes that appeal to our unconscious biases and prejudices that we don't even know we have. And so we can be convinced to reject social programs um, on these grounds without understanding why we're rejecting them. And that way we could still, if we think it's about wasting our tax dollars or government, waste, and we don't have to think too hard, we could still think of ourselves as good people instead of admitting that we're rejecting these policies on racial grounds because you know, we don't want everybody in this country to have the same leg up or help. But yeah, so the welfare queen is a huge myth. But there's so many myths politically that we believe, like tax cuts stimulating the economy. That has never been true. There's never been any proof of that. It's never happened in the history of the world. But you could see how it's a very useful myth for all the wealthy people that back politicians that promise to cut taxes, because all the wealthy have to do is, convince us that, oh, if we, cut their taxes, that'll drive the economy. And when it has never done that in 50
Right.
years, 40 years. So yeah, there are just so many myths. I feel like, and especially on the right, so many myths that we believe were, kind of manufactured in the 70s um, to reclaim some of the ground that the consumer and environmental movements and the social and the poverty movements, the headway they made in like the 60s and 70s. And so all this was kind of a reaction to that. Because if you can't sell reality, if reality's not working for you, then you have to create propaganda or bullshit or a myth that's more sellable. Like you can't campaign on defunding, not helping poor people. Like,
Right.
that doesn't work. Even if that's your goal, like, you have to dress that up and brand that better. So, yeah. So a lot of the myths I definitely grew up in the South. Like all of these myths are so ingrained in the culture and they're not even political myths anymore. They're just like cultural, um, they're just cultural
Like
beliefs that you
programming.
see reinforced. It is. And you see it reinforced because that's all you look for, So, like, part of the psychology lesson in the book is how, if we're primed to notice something, then we'll start noticing it, and at the expense of all the counter examples, which is why it's so hard to get people to kind of change their opinions. Because, if you tell someone, back home, Black people abuse the welfare system, then all you have to do is look out for one Black person on welfare that you suspect of abusing it, and like that belief is confirmed, even when Black people are the minority of the people on welfare. It's mostly poor white people. Um, but so the myths, yeah, survive because it just takes a little bit of confirmation, just enough that, keeps you buying into it and you don't really question it. Um, but data, if you read a lot of nonfiction like I do, the data is pretty clear for most stuff. And uh, yeah, and well before I was even political or cared about politics at all, I still read a lot. And then, when you read a lot of nonfiction, as long as it's coming from academics or experts or journalists or people who have spent their careers studying this, and for the most part, all that nonfiction, all those facts and data tend to agree. Like whether you're writing about climate change in the US or Australia or Germany, all the studies are the same. They all agree climate change is real, it's man-made, and
Sure.
so all the academics and scientists are on the same page. And the only time this counter argument appears is when that knowledge gets into the public and it threatens someone's business model, or
For
or
sure. For
something.
sure.
And then that's when the myths start. That's the when the myths start that, oh, tobacco doesn't cause cancer, and
Right.
oh, burning fossil fuels doesn't cause global warming, or oh, the science is out, or oh, there's too much confusion. Like, like you can trace um the start of all of these myths, and
Sure.
they all have a very similar history. you know they all come
Right.
from a handful of PR companies paid for by the oil and gas or the tobacco companies, paid really well to confuse the public, even when, yeah, science has been settled on this for decades.
Sure. I have a question going back to the civil rights movement. This is something that I read. I don't know if you're aware of it, but the book To Kill a Mockingbird, when that came out, they said that that was such a huge marketing tool for the civil rights movement. Do you know anything about that?
No, but it wouldn't surprise me, um, that I think what To Kill a Mockingbird likely did was, um, it's still a white protagonist. It's still it's accessible for white people to see how unfairly Black people were treated in a way that they may not have had exposure to otherwise, because the world was still very segregated at that point. um, and so it wouldn't surprise me if it definitely helped, um, or it was used, because a lot of times art and books were used, like Uncle Tom's Cabin. There have been a lot of books that did, was it The Jungle, about food processing, and often the works of art serve that purpose, because it's a window into something people may not know about, um, and it also kind of gives people empathy towards people who are not like them, because then
Interesting. Yeah.
they put themselves in their shoes. There's a lot of research that says the more we read, the more likely we are to have empathy for people, and
For sure.
reading and putting yourself in others' points of view and others' shoes makes a huge difference, especially if we don't come across those people or situations in our own lives.
Exactly. I was just reading a handful of writing books, and one was on just the psychology of writing, or how to it's almost like how to manipulate the reader in a way. I forget what the book was called. It was just published a few years ago. It was done it had a lot of neuro techniques on
Hmm.
how to write in order to get empathy from the reader, and how to write your protagonists and your characters, your scenes, in order for this person to get really hooked. Like, there's this one book that's trending right now, and it's called The Women, and this is a perfect example, and it's about nurses in Vietnam, right? So I thought it was a nonfiction book. I had no clue what it was about. I just went to a conference, and I was telling people, oh, I teach writing, this and that, and they're like, oh, have you read the book The Women? And I was like, no, I haven't. And so the person who wrote it is an attorney, and she wrote a book about these nurses in Vietnam. And then as I was looking into it, because I was like, well, what do you like about the book? And they're like, the they were invisible. The women were invisible. So I bought the book because I'm trying to like crack it, because I love to crack these things. I find great pleasure in why do so many people like this? Like, how is it written? What's going on? And so one of the things is it's the title, The Women. So it's marketed towards women, of course. So there you go. That's number one.
Mhm.
The other thing is, okay, so nurses are always seen as invisible. So these nurses who are reading this book are very much feeling empathy for the protagonist, because they've been in that place. So no wonder.
Right.
So you're
Speaks
pulling
to
at
them.
their heartstrings. But then, and then I saw other women saying, oh my gosh, this is such a great book, blah, blah, blah. And I didn't know this happened in Vietnam, da, da, da. And I looked at it, I was like, but it's fiction. I didn't even realize that. I was like, wait, this is not even a true story. Based probably loosely off of facts that she put together into a story. But I was just like, wow. So I couldn't get into the first page because it was just the way it was written. It was just like I go, I don't know why, for me, if a first page really has to hook me, like the first 2 to 3 sentences, oh, I'm hooked. And that's what I teach in my classes. But I was just like, eh. So I do have it. I did finish a couple other books where this is next on my plate. So I'm ready to dissect it and figure out, I had a very good friend at one point who was an editor, and he literally, this was the secret, rewrote these books for these authors so that they would be like New York Times bestsellers and this and that. Because I would be like, why can't I get through his books? I don't understand. And so one of my other friends who was an attorney was all like, oh, it's because so, and the editor writes them for the author. Basically takes the story and makes it so, you know, it is going to hook the reader, and it's written in a way. So, which is all very, very interesting. But that all goes to that as well. So, wrapping this all up, we're like literally swimming in a cesspool of opinions, designed to mislead, misdirect, misinformation with very little journalistic ethics these days. I even had this issue recently. Someone asked me to write a blurb for walkers, baby walkers. And I was like, oh, I really don't talk about them in clinic. Nobody asked me about them. Let me do some research. And I found that the American Academy of Pediatrics you know, uh, does not want you to use them. They're not good for a baby's hips. They're not good for a baby's walking. So I declined, and to give my blurb. And they're also banned in Canada. And there's
Mm.
recent research and stuff. So I told, my friend, and she was like, well, I'm still going to write the article. And I was like, where's your ethics? Like, how could you write this article? She's like, well, it's for it because it was a marketing piece, and
There you
and
go.
so I was just like, this is so terrible. And then on TikTok, there's Paris Hilton with her kid in a walker, And I was just like, I commented and then somebody asked me another question about her, but I was like, I bet you $20 because she kept showing these pictures of the baby in the walker. I go, she's going to be marketing for a big corporation that sells walkers.
Oh,
It's
probably.
either going to be Target or
Undoubtedly.
Walmart for sure. Okay, so this is what happened recently. That Walmart has this campaign going on in TikTok with these celebrity moms giving advice. Guess who's there giving advice? Paris Hilton. Like she shops at Walmart for sure. So
Right. Right.
it's just like, oh my
No,
gosh.
it
I go, I
should. Well,
called
that,
it.
that stealth marketing, I feel like there's so much of that stealth marketing on social media. The producers of those products send them out, give them for free, and people use them and photograph them. And a lot of times you don't know that they're just hawking, you know, they're getting paid for it.
For
The gas
sure.
stove people do that a lot, like cooking with gas. They were doing it where you had all these teens like showing themselves cooking on TikTok and social media, and like loving their gas stoves and how they would only cook with gas, and they were all getting paid by the gas company.
Wow. I didn't know
Um,
that one. That's
yeah,
interesting.
yeah. I feel like I may mention it briefly in the book, but don't really go into it. But gas stoves actually, I that's something I yeah. But
Got to write a new TikTok
yeah,
edition.
gas stoves are kind of like the tobacco and global warming thing.
Oh,
It's
yeah.
They know they're bad. They know they release toxins in the air and they cause asthma and respiratory issues. But it's the oil and gas lobby, so they keep burying the information um, and scaring people into thinking, oh, the government's going to tell you what kind of stove you could have, and fear mongering and but yeah, so yeah, I'll be wary when you see people cooking with gas on social media and they're just raving about their gas stove and how much better it is and all that. Yeah.
Yeah. So how do we win the war on truth? Read your book, of course,
It's
and get
complicated.
get Chris's book.
Yes. It's well, there's a lot of moving parts.
Here,
It
which
definitely
one?
requires becoming aware of or being media literate, understanding psychology and sociology. But I would say one of the easiest ways is what I mentioned earlier. Always question when you see something who benefits from that article, or headline or information. Become aware of like the language they're using. If there's negative language, notice when your emotions are being manipulated.
Right.
Any headline or tweet or social media post that makes you angry or fearful or outraged, or whatever the negative emotion is, the negative emotion should be a red flag that someone's trying to manipulate you. And especially if it's painting a segment of society in a negative light, whether that's immigrants or transgender people or whatever it is. Notice the negative language. There was my Twitter feed yesterday, and yes, I still call it Twitter. Kept
Me too.
showing how was it? It was someone on the right that was basically smearing the campus protests. But I counted in this tweet 6 negative adjectives to describe like the campus protests. And I was like, all right, yeah, real journalists don't do that. Like, you
Right.
don't need adjectives to convey information or opinion. And if you did, you only need like one. But it was like the manipulation tactics are so heavy on social media. So anytime, the ad hominem attacks or the smearing, anytime you're smearing someone, like, or, that should be a red flag.
For
Even
sure.
having negative emotions towards someone you don't know and you can't explain why is another like warning sign. And I like to use Hillary Clinton as a great example. Like everybody's like, oh, I'm just so tired of Hillary. Oh, I hate Hillary. But yet no one can ever really define why they hate Hillary. Like, it's not like any of those people rattle off the policies that they disagree with, or anything concrete, and so that's usually a sign that, like, right, you've just been sold hate against her for so long, you don't even know why you dislike her. So yeah, anytime we can't like quite justify or quantify why we hate someone, then that's probably a good marker that we've been sold those negative emotions. Um, Whereas, like if I were if I were listing the reasons I don't like Donald Trump, there would be a very long list of facts. It wouldn't be anything that's kind of just, amorphous without a definite shape, and that's often kind of, the difference. So emotions or emotional intelligence is huge, and it's not something we often think of when we consume news and information. Um, and yeah, so always ask who benefits from any headline. If immigrants are taking our jobs or whatever is the headline, why is that? Let's just say that's the headline. Why is that the headline and not American corporations refuse to pay a standard of living to Americans, so illegal immigrants must do the work for lower pay? Like,
Right.
you know, you have to think beyond that quick emotional rapid fire response, like, oh damn it, I knew we shouldn't let immigrants into this country. Like, okay, no, what is that headline not saying? Like, um, and so, right. So when you look at the alternatives to how you would phrase some of those things, you can see how, um, you don't need the fear mongering or the anger to relay real information. And so the more boring a headline is and the more unemotional it is, then chances are it's, the more real it probably is. And that's one thing that partisan media does really well, is using emotional language, because that kills critical thinking. So the more
Wow.
emotional language that was like a Hitler propaganda tactic. Goebbels and Hitler like use emotion for the many and reason for the few. And so Fox News and a lot of those right-wing outlets, like they have to keep the outrage and um, manufactured at a drumbeat, because it takes that constant emotional manipulation to keep people from questioning what you're telling, and to looking at it with a critical eye. And so, uh, like I like, and you look at Trump, everything out of his mouth is emotional, right? He's always slandering, and you look at all the negative adjectives he uses constantly. But if you were to hear, say, Elizabeth Warren in an interview, does she ever use an adjective? Like everything out of her mouth is policy, right? How to solve this problem, what we want to do, how to do it. She's not slandering, she's not selling hate. If anything, the emotions she employs are usually aspirational. Like, oh, we want to solve this, we need to do this, this will help everyday Americans. It's not demonizing, it's not demagoguery. You don't ever see that out of her mouth. And so, noticing the language people use and noticing the emotions that drive it is probably one of the best things we can all do.
And that's such a great point you bring up, because anytime someone is very aggressive or very, um, I don't know, just, uh, you're not
Right.
gonna question them as much, like the bullies. That's why they keep bullying,
Yeah.
because your executive function, or your reasoning is shut down, because you're just kind of thrown off with this aggression. And that happens with me, and you just tend to back down and just follow whatever they say. So that makes a lot of
Yeah.
sense.
And it is a bullying. It's a bullying tactic, a manipulation tactic. And it's a political strategy. Like, the marketing consultants for Reagan and Trump called it rejectionist voting. You don't have to get people to like your candidate. All you have to get them to do is hate your opponent. Um,
Oh, that's
and
right.
and
That's a good
so so
point.
so when you do that, excuse me. So when you do that, you don't have to stand for anything, which is what we're seeing a lot right now in politics is, the right doesn't stand for much, but they stand against everything. Because it's, as long as you can get someone to hate the other side or demonize them or whatever, you just have to convince people to vote against them. And it doesn't matter what you actually stand for, what you're going to do once you're in power. Um, all you have to do is keep them hating the right people. Um, and I think that's why when I'm on social media, like all I see is hate, 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 hate.
Right.
Um, all smears, all hate, all trying to drag people down. And most of the time, it's all lies and misinformation. I mean, I keep using Twitter in my head as an example because for some reason, Twitter keeps showing me all of this shit. And like, I don't follow any of these people. Like, I don't follow any of these people, think tanks, fake news organizations, but yet my feed is populated with them. And like, it is
All the
all just,
bots.
it's all lies and all misinformation and all, like another tactic that I find really devious is like say it was one I saw today. I don't remember who it was, Fox News or I don't know who posted it, but it was basically what Americans think, how Americans think Joe Biden's like not doing a good job or something. Um, and so, if you share or you tout what people are thinking, like, oh, well, see, people think he's doing a bad job. But yeah, but that's only because you keep telling them that. Like, not because of what he's actually doing. But there were a lot of posts like that. There was like polls, like, oh, polls, think that Trump's the best leader or whatever it is. And it's like, yeah, but you can't quantify that with like data to show he's the best leader. So like, popular opinion and public opinion is a way to uh, spread a lie or a
Right.
myth without saying it. Like, but then I see that all the time in these like polls where they're, do you trust this person on the what? And it's like, um, and they're saying it, like election interference or the 2020 election. Oh, but like I see Republican pollsters on CNN all the time saying this. Well, yeah, but this percentage of the public, has doubts in election integrity or doubt the election results, or and it's like, okay, but what you're saying is the takeaway here is, oh, there are doubts in the election. But what you should be saying is this percentage of the public have been manipulated into believing lies and so you're giving the lies credence by
Right.
sharing the misinformed opinions. And so that was kind of a long tangent, but
It's okay. Cool. So tell everybody where they can buy your book, your website.
sure. So the book is available online and at your favorite booksellers. It comes in paperback, ebook, as well as audiobook. The audiobook has a little more information that didn't make it into the book, which is cool, but you miss all of the cool illustrations and humor with the audiobook. My personal website is samuelcspitale.com. That's Samuel C S P I T A L E.com. And you could find me social media on Twitter, Instagram, all the usuals at Samuel C. Spitale. And I actually just started a new channel on YouTube that's How to Win the
Awesome.
War on Truth, where each week or so I'm going to do like a video that kind of does a brief deep dive into things we're misinformed about. So,
Very fun,
so I've been,
exciting. I
yeah.
love it.
So yeah.
Congrats.
So thank you. Yeah, I
Perfect
just every
timing.
Monday I've been trying to post one. So voter fraud, I think, was the last one. Global warming, climate change, and I have one coming up on red baiting and states' rights and abortion.
Excellent.
So
Awesome.
yeah,
All right. Well, thank you so much for being on. Until next time, we'll
yeah. Thank you
see
for
you.
having me. This was
All
great.
right.